Bilbo Baggins stepped lightly down the well-worn path leading to Bag End, his heart aflutter with a blend of apprehension and exhilaration. The verdant hills of the Shire, bathed in the soft golden glow of late afternoon, welcomed him back with a familiarity that tugged at his soul. His journey, an unexpected adventure that had whisked him far beyond the boundaries of this land, had finally led him home. As he passed under the arching boughs of the old trees that lined the lane, memories of dragons, dwarves, and distant lands danced in his mind. But now, those adventures were behind him, and the comforts of home beckoned. The round door of Bag End, painted a cheerful green and adorned with a gleaming brass knob in the very middle, stood before him, as inviting as ever. Stepping inside, Bilbo breathed in the familiar scents of his hobbit hole, the faint aroma of pipeweed, the earthy fragrance of wood, and a hint of the lavender that grew just outside his window. He felt a sense of relief wash over him. The walls of Bag End embraced him like an old friend. But Bilbo was not one to let his return go unnoticed or uncelebrated. With the treasure he had brought back from his adventures, he planned to throw the grandest feast the Shire had ever seen. Word of Bilbo's return and the upcoming feast spread quickly. From Hobbiton to Buckland, from Tuckborough to Brandy Hall, every hobbit in the Shire buzzed with anticipation. Bilbo Baggins's feast was not something to be missed. In the days that followed, preparations were made. Tables and benches were crafted and set up in the party field near Bag End. Lanterns and streamers were hung from every possible nook and tree. Kitchens were bustling with activity as the most skilled hobbit cooks prepared an array of dishes, from savory pies to sweet tarts and everything in between. The day of the feast arrived with a perfect cloudless sky. The sun shone warmly, casting a gentle light over the Shire, as if nature itself was in a mood to celebrate. The party field was transformed into a vision of festivity and mirth, with tables groaning under the weight of food and drink. As the first of the guests began to arrive, Bilbo stood at the gate of Bag End, a wide grin on his face. His eyes, bright with the spark of adventure and the joy of homecoming, greeted each guest. Little did they know, they were in for not just a feast for their bellies, but a feast for their minds as well. For Bilbo had stories to tell, stories of a world beyond the Shire, tales of courage, friendship, and wonder. And on this night, under the starlit sky of the Shire, these stories would come to life. As the last rays of the sun dipped below the rolling hills of the Shire, the party field near Bag End came alive with the sounds and scents of celebration. Hobbits from across the region, dressed in their finest waistcoats and gowns, gathered under the twinkling lights strung from tree to tree. The air was filled with laughter, music from fiddles and flutes, and the enticing aromas of the feast. In the center of it all stood Bilbo Baggins, his face glowing with pride and joy. He had spared no expense in preparing this feast, and it showed in every corner of the field. Long tables were laden with the best of Hobbit culinary achievements. There were platters of roasted chicken and duck, glistening with a honey glaze and surrounded by herbs from the gardens of Hobbiton. Huge, steaming pies sat proudly, their crusts golden and flaky, with savory fillings of mushrooms, onions, and cheese. Baskets of fresh bread loaves colored crusty brown, soft buns and braided loaves sprinkled with seeds were passed around, accompanied by churns of creamy butter and pots of homemade jams in flavors like blackberry and strawberry. Vegetables from the Shire's best gardens, carrots, peas, and tender green beans were cooked to perfection, seasoned lightly to enhance their natural flavors. Desserts were a spectacle in themselves. There were tarts filled with custard and topped with berries, cakes layered with cream and fruit, and sweet buns oozing with honey. The famous Brandy Hall apple crumbles were there too, filling the air with their warm, spiced aroma. As for drinks, barrels of ale from the Green Dragon Inn were a highlight, along with casks of cider from the orchards of Buckland. Fine wines, a rarity in the Shire, but a special edition for Bilbo's feast, were poured generously. They had come from distant lands and added an exotic touch to the night. The hobbits feasted heartily, their plates and cups constantly refilled. Laughter and cheerful conversations filled the air, creating a warm atmosphere. Old friends reunited, sharing stories and news, while the younger ones played games on the grass, their laughter ringing through the night. As the moon rose high in the night sky, casting a silvery glow over the field, a sense of anticipation began to build. The hobbits knew that after the feast, Bilbo would share tales of his incredible journey, stories they had only heard whispers of. Their eyes turned towards him, waiting for the moment when he would stand and begin his tale. Bilbo, feeling the weight of their expectations, took a deep breath. He smiled, his eyes twinkling in the moonlight. This was the moment he had been waiting for, to share his adventure, to bring a piece of the wide world back to the Shire. He stood up, cleared his throat, and in a voice that carried over the field, began to speak.
"My dear friends and fellow hobbits,"
he began, his voice rich with the excitement of shared tales.
"Tonight, I invite you to journey with me through my memories, to lands beyond our beautiful Shire, to adventures great and dangers untold."
His gaze swept over the faces, all glowing in the soft evening light, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and wonder.
"So gather round, for these are not just my adventures, but stories for all of us, a testament to the courage that lies in even the smallest of us. I will start with the tale of my encounter with 3 trolls that almost ended my adventures before they truly began. Our company, led by the brave dwarf Thorin Oakenshield, had been travelling through the wilds, and I, being rather new to the business of adventuring, was struggling with the hardships of the road. The night in question was particularly miserable. The rain had soaked us to the bone, and our spirits were as damp as our cloaks. As we trudged through the gloomy woods, Gandalf, our wizard companion, announced that he had to leave on an urgent matter, promising to return soon. His departure left us feeling even more desolate, but we continued, driven by Thorin's unyielding determination. The night grew darker, and hunger began to gnaw at my insides. The dwarves were grumbling about food, their moods as stormy as the sky above. It was then that we noticed a light flickering in the distance. Thorin decided that we should investigate, hoping, perhaps, for a chance to find food or shelter. Creeping closer, we discovered the light came from a fire, around which sat 3 of the most grotesque creatures I had ever laid eyes on, trolls. These weren't the fairy tale creatures I had heard about in Hobbit tales. They were large, brutish, and had a stench that made my eyes water. My companions looked to me, the burglar of the group, to sneak closer and find out more. Heart pounding, I tiptoed towards the trolls, trying to ignore the fear that screamed in every part of my being. I thought perhaps I could steal a bit of food, or even some treasure, something to prove my worth. Alas, my skills as a burglar were not as honed as they later became. Just as I reached out to grab a wallet that hung from one of the troll's belts, I was caught. The troll's hand shot out and grabbed me, his grip like iron. I was hoisted up and dangled before their beady, malicious eyes. The trolls were as stupid as they were ugly. They bickered among themselves about what to do with me, boil me, squash me into jelly. The options they discussed were not particularly appealing. Just when I thought my end was near, my dwarven companions, brave and loyal, burst forth to rescue me. However, things did not go as planned. One by one, the dwarves were caught by the trolls, until all of us, including Thorin, were tied up in sacks. There we were, a group of adventurers, bested by the dim-wittedness of trolls. Our fate seemed sealed as the trolls argued over cooking methods, but Providence intervened in the form of Gandalf. Just when the first light of dawn was creeping into the sky, Gandalf's voice, imitating the trolls, stirred up an argument among them. Can you believe that? As they quarrelled, the light of the sun peeked over the horizon. Trolls, as I learned that day, turn to stone in sunlight. And that's exactly what happened. The first rays touched the trolls, and they froze, transforming into grotesque stone statues. We were saved. The relief was overwhelming. Gandalf untied us, and there was much rejoicing and praising of his cleverness. The ordeal with the trolls taught me a valuable lesson about the perils of adventure and the unexpected challenges one might face. Now, many days later, as I stand here in front of you all, I can't help but chuckle. Those trolls, terrifying as they were at the moment, were the first of many dangers I faced. Little did I know it was just the beginning of what was to be the greatest adventure of my life.
Bilbo then took a moment to toss a plump grape in his mouth and a few slices of cheese, as hobbits will do from time to time. After all, he was not going to let any food go to waste from the precious feast. He then continued his storytelling.
While the trolls were a harrowing experience, they were not as eerie and chilling as the depths of Mirkwood Forest. As we entered the forest, a heavy sense of foreboding settled over us. The canopy above was so thick that barely any light penetrated through, casting everything in a perpetual twilight. The air was stale, and the path, barely visible, twisted and turned, leading us deeper into the unknown. The trees of Mirkwood stood like silent sentinels, their gnarled branches intertwining above, blocking out the sky. The further we ventured, the more I felt as though the forest itself was watching us, a malevolent presence lurking in the shadowy underbrush. We were warned not to stray from the path, but in Mirkwood, even the path seemed to conspire against us. It wasn't long before we realized we weren't alone. Whispers in the shadows, the rustling of leaves, eyes peering from the dark. We were being followed. Then came the elves. Oh, they were not the friendly sort you might hear of in children's tales. These elves were enchanting, yes, but also aloof and mysterious. They appeared and disappeared like mirages, luring us off our path with their haunting songs and ethereal lights. Each time we thought we had found them, they vanished, leaving us lost and disoriented. But our real test came when we encountered the spiders. I remember waking up to find myself alone, the dwarves gone. My heart pounding, I soon discovered the horrifying truth. Giant spiders had ensnared my friends in their webs, their grotesque, bulbous bodies hovering menacingly as they prepared to feast. Fear gripped me, but I knew I had to act. Clutching the small sword I had named Sting, I felt a courage I never knew I possessed. With stealth, I moved among the spiders, cutting the dwarves free from their bindings. The spiders, confused by their disappearing prey, scuttled around in a frenzy. I taunted them, leading them away, my heart racing with every step. Old fat spider spinning in a tree. Old fat spider can't see me. Add a cop. Add a cop. Won't you stop? Stop your spinning and look for me. Old Tom Noddy, all big body. Old Tom Noddy can't spy me. Add a cop. Add a cop. Down you drop. You'll never catch me up your tree. It was a terrifying dance with death, and for a moment I doubted we would survive. But we did. With bravery and a bit of luck, we managed to escape those dreadful creatures. Looking back at that harrowing experience, I realize it was there, in the heart of Mirkwood, that I truly discovered my own bravery and resourcefulness. That encounter with the spiders of Mirkwood was more than just a fight for survival. It was a pivotal moment in my journey, a test of my character. It taught me that even the smallest of us can face great dangers, and it was a lesson I carried with me through the rest of my adventures.
Bilbo then took a large gulp of delicious ale and a long draw on this pipe. He seemed to be in a trance, contemplating his next words carefully.
And finally, my last encounter was the most extraordinary and terrifying event of my entire adventure. The day I met Smaug, the grand and menacing dragon. Our journey to the lonely mountain was fraught with danger, but nothing could have prepared me for the awe and fear I felt when I first stepped into the treasure-filled halls of Erebor. The air was thick with the smell of gold and dust, and the silence was almost deafening. It was my task, as the burglar of the group, to go into the dragon's lair alone. I can tell you, my heart was in my mouth as I tiptoed through the vast piles of treasure, the weight of my responsibility pressing heavily upon me. Then I saw him, Smaug. He was colossal, a vast serpentine creature coiled amidst mountains of gold and jewels. His scales shimmered like molten gold, and his eyes, when they opened, were like fiery pits that seemed to peer into the very depths of my soul. The sight of him was so overwhelming that for a moment I could do nothing but stand there, rooted to the spot in both horror and fascination. Gathering every ounce of courage I had, I began to speak, my voice a mere whisper in the vast chamber. I flattered the dragon, calling him Smaug the Tremendous and chiefest and greatest of calamities. I knew dragons were vain creatures, and I hoped to distract him with my words while I searched for the Arkenstone, the heart of the mountain, which Thorin Oakenshield so desperately sought. Smaug's voice was deep and menacing, a rumbling sound that echoed off the walls and seemed to fill the entire mountain. He was cunning and suspicious, and it quickly became apparent that he enjoyed this game of riddles and words. We spoke back and forth, me doing my best to keep him engaged and off guard, while subtly probing for any information about the Arkenstone. "Who are you and where do you come from?" roared the great Smaug. I didn't think it was a good idea to give him my real name, so I responded with some talk of riddles. "I am the clue finder, the web cutter, the stinging fly. I am the friend of bears and guest of eagles. I am ring winner and luck wearer, and I am barrel rider." Smaug seemed to be okay with this answer, but he pressed further about why I was in his gold-filled lair. "Oh, Smaug, you must realize that your success has made some bitter enemies. I am here for revenge." This visibly upset him. His eyes flickered like fire and his voice boomed like thunder. "Revenge. The king under the mountain is dead, and I have eaten his people like a wolf among sheep. I kill where I wish, and none dare resist. I have laid low the warriors of old, and none is like them today. My armor is like tenfold shields, my teeth are swords, my claws spears, the shock of my tail a thunderbolt, my winds a hurricane, and my breath death." It was during this exchange that I noticed a small bare patch in the dragon's jewel-encrusted underbelly. It was a weakness, a chink in his otherwise impenetrable armor. This discovery, though small, filled me with a glimmer of hope. If Smaug could be wounded, then he could be defeated. The encounter ended with Smaug, enraged by my riddles and insinuations, bursting forth from the mountain in a fury, determined to wreak havoc upon Lake Town, where he believed his enemy to be hiding. I was filled with guilt and fear for what I had unleashed upon those innocent people. That day, in the heart of the lonely mountain, I learned much about myself and the nature of true bravery. It wasn't about wielding a sword or going into battle. It was about facing your fears, however great they might be, and doing what needed to be done. Looking back now, I realized that meeting Smaug was not just a terrifying encounter with a dragon. It was a pivotal moment that shaped the rest of our journey and the fate of many. And as I sit here, safe and sound in the Shire, I often wonder at the strange turns of fate that led a simple hobbit like me to converse with a dragon deep in the heart of a mountain.
As the night wore on, the feast gradually came to an end. Full from the lavish meal and mesmerized by Bilbo's tales, the hobbits began to disperse, their voices a low murmur under the starlit sky. The lanterns swayed gently in the night breeze, casting a warm golden glow over the party field, now littered with remnants of the celebration. Bilbo, standing at the gate of Bag End, bid his guests farewell with a heartfelt smile and a twinkle in his eye. The younger hobbits, still buzzing with excitement from the stories, lingered, hoping for just one more tale. But one by one, they too headed home, their minds brimming with images of trolls, elves, and dragons. However, unbeknownst to some, a few hobbit children lingered about in the woods nearby. As the last of the guests disappeared into the night, Bilbo turned and walked slowly back to his house. He paused at his door, looking out over the Shire. The familiar hills, dotted with the lights of hobbit holes, seemed to him more precious than ever. He thought of his journey, of the friends he had made, and the dangers he had faced. These experiences had changed him, and yet, here in the Shire, life went on as it always had. As he stood before his green, round door to Bag End, he heard some snickering in the bushes outside his window. Knowing this to be some young hobbits, he decided to play a little trick to end the night. Bilbo stepped inside, walked over to his favorite chair by the fireplace, now cold and dark. He lit up a fire and gazed into the flickering flames. Slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the small golden ring, the one he had kept secret from all but a few. With a playful grin, he slipped it onto his finger. In an instant, Bilbo Baggins disappeared from sight, the ring's magic enveloping him. He heard an audible gasp from outside his window as the children gazed at where he once sat. To them, it seemed as though he had vanished into thin air. In this moment of invisibility, he felt a rush of excitement, a reminder of the adventure and the wider world beyond the Shire. But as the thrill passed, a sense of peace settled over him. He called out for the children to return home, and he removed the ring and tucked it back into his pocket, knowing that for now, his place was here, in the Shire, among the rolling hills and the simple joys of hobbit life. Bilbo leaned back in his chair, a contented sigh escaping his lips. Outside, the Shire slept peacefully, unaware of the magic and mystery that had briefly touched its quiet existence. And Bilbo Baggins, the once and future adventurer, closed his eyes, his heart full of memories and a gentle smile on his face.